What happens when your biggest inspiration becomes the person everyone compares you to? For Crystal Gayle, that question wasn't just a passing thought, it was her entire life. Before she became one of the most recognizable voices in country music, she was known simply as Loretta Lynn's little sister. And while that title opened some doors, it also closed others in ways most fans never knew. Behind the sparkle of platinum records and Grammy wins, there was a story of quiet struggle, of a young woman torn between family loyalty and the need to step out of her sister's enormous shadow. Magazines would soon whisper about a feud, fans would speculate about tension, and reporters would twist every family disagreement into headlines. But here's the truth. The relationship between Loretta Lynn and Crystal Gayle wasn't just about competition. It was about survival, self-discovery, and the courage to become your own person in a world that only saw you as someone else's reflection. And as we dig deeper, you'll see that the so-called feud the media loved to sell wasn't nearly as dramatic as they made it sound. But it was born from something real: pressure, comparison, and the impossible expectations of fame. Because before there was "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue," there was a young girl named Brenda Gayle Webb, standing in a recording booth, wondering if the world would ever see her for who she truly was. Crystal's journey began with a dream, but also with a shadow. When she signed her first deal under her sister's label, Decca Records, she was thrilled. Loretta's husband, Oliver Doolittle Lynn, even managed her at the start. For a moment, it felt like destiny, like the Webb family from Kentucky was unstoppable. Imagine working your whole life to find your voice, only to be told it sounds better when it's someone else's. Even though Loretta had helped open those first doors, Crystal soon felt trapped by the very legacy she admired most. And in the middle of that confusion came one crucial moment, a conversation with her sister that would change everything. It was simple, but it would set her on the path that finally separated Brenda Webb from Loretta Lynn's sister. One afternoon, Loretta sat her little sister down. The advice she gave wasn't wrapped in comfort. It was firm, maybe even a little harsh. She told Crystal, "Don't sing my songs. There's only one Loretta Lynn, and that's me." For many, those words would have sounded like rejection. But for Crystal, they became a turning point, a challenge to carve out something completely her own. Loretta wasn't trying to push her sister away. In her own tough love way, she was setting her free. She understood the cruelty of comparison, how the music industry could swallow individuality whole. What she wanted was for Crystal to avoid the same traps she had fought her way through. Still, outsiders didn't see it that way. The tabloids pounced. Headlines started appearing. Loretta Lynn feuding with sister over fame, or family rift in country music's first family. None of it was true, but once a rumor catches fire, it's almost impossible to put out. For Crystal, that conversation became a moment of awakening. She realized she could no longer keep chasing a career shaped by someone else's blueprint. If she wanted to survive in music, she had to risk everything: her comfort, her label, and her identity. And that's exactly what she did next. Leaving Decca Records in 1974 wasn't an easy decision. Crystal had grown up under that roof. It was the same label that built Loretta Lynn into a star. But she knew she couldn't stay. Every time she walked into the studio, she felt the same pressure. "Can you make it sound more like your sister?" So she walked away. That single act of defiance changed everything. Soon, she found herself working with producer Alan Reynolds, the man who would become instrumental in reinventing her entire sound. Reynolds encouraged her to drop the old Nashville formula and instead focus on what made her voice unique. That smooth, velvety tone that could cross over from country into pop without losing its soul. Together, they began crafting songs that didn't just fit radio trends, they built a new identity. Her music became softer, warmer, and more universal. She wasn't singing for one genre anymore. She was singing for everyone who had ever felt misunderstood, underestimated, or compared to someone else. And just when people began to wonder if she had made a mistake, leaving the comfort of Decca, fate handed her the song that would make history and silence the critics once and for all. The year was 1977. Crystal stepped into the studio to record a song written by Richard Lee, a track that, believe it or not, almost went to another artist entirely. The song was called "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue." Producer Alan Reynolds knew it was something special the moment he heard it. He told Lee, "We're not sending this song anywhere." Crystal recorded it in a single take, one flawless, emotional performance that would change her life forever. When the song hit radio, everything shifted overnight. It wasn't just a country hit, it was a cultural moment. It topped the Billboard country chart, climbed to #2 on the Hot 100, and exploded internationally, charting in the UK and across Europe. Fans couldn't get enough of her silky voice and timeless phrasing. Critics called it a masterpiece of restraint, simple, haunting, and beautiful. And for the first time, Crystal Gayle wasn't being compared to Loretta Lynn. She was being compared to no one. But as her fame grew, so did the whispers. The world loved the story of two sisters, both stars, and controversy sells better than love. The question was no longer whether Crystal could make it on her own. It was whether her success had driven a wedge between her and Loretta. And as the headlines piled up, the rumors only grew louder. By the late 1970s, Crystal Gayle had everything most artists could only dream of: a Grammy Award, platinum albums, and global recognition. But while the charts celebrated her voice, the tabloids started to paint a very different picture. The media had discovered the perfect story: two sisters at the top of country music, one a seasoned legend, the other a glamorous rising star. To them, it didn't matter how close the Webb sisters really were. A supposed rivalry between Loretta Lynn and Crystal Gayle was too irresistible to ignore. Headlines began flooding gossip columns with phrases like "Loretta's jealous of Crystal's success" or "sisterly showdown in Nashville." Photos of them together were analyzed for tension. Every word from an interview was twisted to suggest bitterness. But the truth was much quieter. In reality, Crystal and Loretta were still family. Two sisters who had shared laughter, memories, and long nights talking about music and life. Sure, they had disagreements like any siblings would, but a feud? That was far from the truth. Crystal would later admit in interviews that the rumors sometimes hurt, not because they damaged her reputation, but because they cheapened the relationship she cherished most. She said, "We were sisters. We could argue, but we didn't have any problems." The misunderstanding came from perspective. While the media wanted to see competition, Crystal saw admiration. She had grown up idolizing Loretta, watching her fight through a male-dominated industry to become a pioneer. And Loretta, in turn, was proud to see her little sister find her own voice. Still, the noise around them grew louder. It was as if the world couldn't accept that two women from the same family could both succeed without tearing each other down. The pressure was relentless. Interviews, comparisons, even award shows turned into subtle contests for public attention. But instead of letting it drive a wedge between them, Crystal made a quiet decision. She would let her music speak louder than the headlines. And as the media chased drama, Crystal focused on what she'd always done best: building her career with grace, authenticity, and her unmistakably smooth sound. That choice to rise above gossip would soon reveal something most people never knew: the depth of the bond she shared with Loretta and how that connection shaped every step of her journey. Behind the spotlight, there was a sisterhood built on trust, faith, and shared struggle. When cameras were off, Crystal often turned to Loretta for advice, and Loretta never sugarcoated a thing. Whether it was about the industry, family, or the cost of fame, Loretta told her the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Crystal once shared that it was her sister who got her first recording contract. Loretta had believed in her long before the world did, pulling strings and making introductions that helped Crystal take her first steps into Nashville's demanding scene. And while the media focused on the supposed competition, the reality was that they often celebrated each other's victories behind closed doors. Crystal admired Loretta's raw storytelling and working-class grit. Loretta, in turn, loved Crystal's sophistication and crossover success. They were reflections of two different sides of the same coin, one rooted in traditional country, the other exploring new sounds for a modern era. Over the years, their relationship evolved. but their love remained constant. When Loretta passed away at age 90, Crystal spoke with deep emotion about how much her sister meant to her. She didn't talk about fame or awards, she talked about family, about growing up in a small Kentucky home with 8 siblings, about the laughter, and about the music that connected them all. Even before Loretta's passing, their connection went beyond music. Crystal toured with her siblings, often bringing her sister Peggy Sue on the road as part of her band. Family, to her, was never something she left behind. It was the foundation she carried into every stage she performed on. Fans who had believed the feud narrative were often stunned when they saw the sisters together, joking and smiling. There was no animosity, just the bond of 2 women who had both weathered fame's storm and still found peace in each other's presence. Loretta once said in an interview, "If I had to go through everything all over again, I'd still help Crystal. She's my sister and I love her." That single line said more than any rumor ever could. And while the tabloids eventually lost interest, Crystal's journey was far from over. Now that she had proven she could stand on her own, it was time to cement her legacy, one that would forever reshape the image of country music itself. With the dust of the rumors behind her, Crystal Gayle began to focus on what she truly loved, creating music that transcended boundaries. Her style had matured into something that was undeniably her own. Smooth, elegant, and soulful, it wasn't traditional Nashville, and it wasn't pure pop. It was Crystal Gayle. By the time the 1980s arrived, she had firmly stepped out from her sister's shadow. Her albums were going platinum, her singles were crossing into mainstream charts, and she became one of the first female country artists to achieve massive crossover appeal. Songs like "Talking in Your Sleep" and "Half the Way" showcased her ability to blend emotion with sophistication, reaching audiences who had never listened to country before. Critics began to notice something remarkable. She wasn't succeeding because she was Loretta's sister anymore. She was succeeding because she had become a symbol of evolution in country music. She represented the bridge between traditional and modern, between the roots of the South and the pulse of pop culture. And through it all, she remained grounded. She often spoke about how she never forgot where she came from, the little girl from Paintsville, Kentucky, who grew up listening to her big sister sing. Fame didn't erase that. It deepened her appreciation for the family that had helped shape her. Even her husband, Bill Gatzamos, became a part of her legacy, managing her career with a steady hand and helping her navigate fame without losing herself. Together, they built Crystal Gayle Enterprises, ensuring she had control over her brand, something few female artists achieved at the time. Over the years, Crystal's success became proof that breaking away from expectation doesn't mean abandoning where you came from. It means honoring it in your own way. And as she continued performing to sold-out crowds decades later, she often paid tribute to Loretta on stage, reminding everyone that her story wasn't about rivalry. It was about love, strength, and finding her voice in a world that kept telling her to sound like someone else. Because in the end, Crystal Gayle didn't just follow in her sister's footsteps. She paved her own road, one lined with platinum records, heartfelt songs, and a legacy built on authenticity. When you look back at Crystal Gayle's journey, it's almost poetic. A story that began in the quiet hills of Kentucky and grew into one of the most unexpected success stories in country music history. What started as a sister following in the footsteps of her legendary sibling became something far more profound. The story of a woman who redefined what it meant to be your own artist, even when the world tried to label you as someone else's shadow. Crystal didn't just chase fame. She carved out a space where she could exist as herself. Every decision she made, from her sound to her image, was deliberate. She didn't scream rebellion. She whispered it through elegance. While Loretta Lynn sang about the struggles of working-class women with raw honesty, Crystal showed another side. The grace, the modern femininity, and the quiet strength that could stand beside the grit and power of her sister's voice. Their paths weren't meant to compete, they were meant to complete each other. Together, they represented the 2 sides of country music, tradition and transformation. And even though the media once tried to pit them against each other, Time has proven that their story was never about rivalry. It was about resilience. Crystal once said in an interview, "I wanted to be me. I wanted to sing songs that made people feel good." That simple statement captures everything her journey stood for. She didn't want to fight her sister for a spotlight. She wanted to shine in her own right, to show that success doesn't have to come from conflict, but from courage. Decades later, her name still echoes across the country scene, her voice instantly recognizable, her songs timeless. From "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue" to her countless collaborations, Crystal Gayle remains one of those rare artists who managed to balance fame with authenticity. She proved that it's possible to break away without breaking apart, that you can honor your roots while still growing into something entirely your own. And maybe that's the most powerful part of her legacy. Because for every artist who's ever been compared, overshadowed, or underestimated, Crystal's story serves as a quiet reminder: you don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes, the calmest voice is the one that leaves the deepest mark. Even today, when fans look back on country music's golden era, the bond between Loretta Lynn and Crystal Gayle stands out not for rivalry, but for respect. They were sisters who walked different roads, yet both ended up changing the landscape of music forever. Their story isn't just about fame. It's about family, about faith, about staying true to who you are even when the world is trying to write your story for you. So now, let me ask you, what do you think really defined Crystal Gayle's journey? Was it her determination to step out of her sister's shadow? Or her grace in never letting the rumors define her legacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe family ties make the journey to fame easier? Or do they make it even harder when the spotlight starts to split? Your perspective might surprise more people than you think. Because sometimes, the most powerful part of a story isn't the fame or the headlines. It's what we take away from it.